And we are on the air, and you are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Let's talk. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. Welcome to my listeners in the United States and around the world. Tune in to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Before we begin today's show, I want to share with you some exciting news. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show, already syndicated on so many stations, is now syndicated on all Amazon Alexa devices. Program your device, say The Halli Casser-Jayne Show, then have a listen. How easy is that? Enjoy. Now, this week on Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, I'm talking with two smart, creative, insightful women. Up first, the inimitable Joyce Maynard, whose compelling new memoir, The Best of Us, is yet another astonishing book from the writer. And at the bottom of the hour, a conversation with author Martha Hall Kelly, whose debut novel, Lilac Girls, made it onto the New York Times bestseller list, and for good reason. There's a lot of ground to cover. Let's get to it. You're listening to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne. A native of New Hampshire, best-selling author Joyce Maynard began publishing her stories in magazines when she was but 13 years old. She first came to national attention in 1972 when she was a freshman at Yale with the publication of her New York Times cover story, An 18-Year-Old Looks Back on Life. Since then, Maynard has been a reporter and columnist for the New York Times, a syndicated newspaper columnist whose domestic affairs column appeared in over 50 papers nationwide, a regular contributor to NPR and national magazines including Vogue, the New York Times Magazine, and many more. She's the author of 17 books, including the novel To Die For and the best-selling memoir At Home in the World, and Labor Day, adapted for film. Always controversial, she had a relationship with recluse author J.D. Salinger when she was but a girl. Startled the public with her candor about child-rearing and failed marriages, and her symphony of failed relationships. Recently, she shocked her fans when she adopted 2 African girls, who she quickly unadopted. Now she returns to the literary stage with her new memoir, The Best of Us, the story of finding the love of her life late in life, only to be met with the biggest test of her life when, 1 year after their marriage, her husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. How can a memoir that deals with tragedy be as compelling as The Best of Us? Leave it to Joyce Maynard. It's time for Talkish. Let's talk. So, Joyce, I'm reading The Best of Us, one line in, and I'm immediately engaged. What I told you off air, I wasn't kidding about. This is really your best work, I think, because this one's from so deep in your gut. I couldn't put it down. And now I'm wondering, what's with this Joyce Maynard? I've been following your career. How come you write so well? Why can't people put your books down? There's got to be a formula. There's got to be a trick. What's the story? Give me something.
Well, I did just finish teaching a memoir workshop, Halli.
There you go.
I won't say there's a formula. I think writing by formula would read like it had been written by formula. But I was raised by the best storyteller I've ever met, my mother, and I've been doing this a very long time. And I will say I've learned a lot from the process of telling stories, whether it's fiction or works of memoir. It's always about the story. And you learn to respect readers. Number one, I do, and their intelligence. So I try to. I'm always thinking about the person on the receiving end of the story, and what she'd want to know, or he'd want to know. Sometimes it's men, and I'm not a fancy storyteller. I try to be clear, and I have to tell you that in this case, although I worked very, very hard to make this the absolute best book that I could, it was not difficult writing this. It would have been difficult not writing it. In fact, it would have been impossible to not write it. It's the only thing I could do after Jim died.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I get that. Listen to me. Most people spend their lives trying to hide their shadow self, and you seem compelled to want to expose it. There's a sincerity to your work.
And it's not for everybody. There's one critic for the Atlantic Monthly who comes to mind. But, yeah, I no big surprise why. I grew up in in a family of gloriously articulate people. I just described my mother as the best storyteller I ever knew. But there was one topic that was never mentioned in our household, and that was the thing that affected our lives more than anything else, which was that every night my father got drunk, and every morning we pretended it never happened. And for me, what I took away from that was that there's nothing so frightening as the story that you don't get to hear, the secret.
Family secrets, yeah. Yeah.
And I will say, that didn't come all at once. In my first book, I certainly did not feel capable of the memoir I published when I was 19. But, I don't completely disavow that. I have an affection for that book. But, nowhere in the 160 pages of my first book was I able to say I grew up in an alcoholic family. And now I know that, that's the core truth that shaped everything else.
And I was going to say to you, I think one thing that's interesting is as we get older, and you and I are about the same age, when you get older and you go through all of the experiences, and then after a while the crap starts to be almost amusing. So it isn't so horrible to tell it, but beyond that, it makes you so much more eminently readable because you are seasoned. I
think that's why people read my work, that they recognize a connection. They may not be like me in all kinds of ways, and they might even, one thing that is one response to my work and my stories that's totally legitimate is to say, oh my God, I'd never do that. I would never take a dying man to a Bob Dylan concert. That's okay. But I'm a recognizably human being, and I'm very comfortable with that. It's not a problem for me revealing my unglorious, non-heroic moments, because we all have them.
So let's talk about The Best of Us, about you learning the meaning of love at the ripe old age of your late 50s. I haven't gotten there yet. So I think that's why
Some people never
I'm waiting on it. Yeah, I'm working. But your book helped a lot. Why do you think that for some of us, learning to love is such a difficult path? Well,
we haven't necessarily seen it modeled, number one. And we're all so busy protecting our hearts. I think, incidentally, that it's hardly ever hard to love a child. That came very naturally to me. But this business of loving a partner, I had experienced a lot of disappointment and loss, and I think I had protected myself against big loss. Ironically, I got big loss, and I regard myself as lucky to have loved somebody enough that it was a big loss. But even the woman that I was the day I married Jim did not really know what marriage was. I loved having this, smart, handsome, funny, loving, endlessly loving partner to, go off in the convertible with and go dancing with and cook meals for and go on trips to Paris, all the sort of the romantic stuff. And it was really, for me, only when all of that was stripped away, and boy, cancer does that I saw that all that mattered were the things that were left. There was no more of that stuff. And all I had was a true partner. And I got to be a true partner. I had never really been one before. I'd never had one. I'd never been one.
Let me take you
I was selfish. Yeah. I didn't know that I was capable of giving that way, actually. Not, giving to a child, yes, but giving to a partner. I thought, I didn't lightly take an afternoon off of my work. My work was the most important thing to me. And suddenly a whole 19 months of my life were given over to trying to save Jim's.
There's so many rat holes you and I could go down on in this conversation. I think that this book is so powerful. Young people should read this. Young women should read this, or young men even. Young middle-aged.
I'm surprised that that's happening on this book tour. I've just come back from this massive, I've never been on a book tour like this. And at first I was kind of baffled that young women were buying this book. And I'd sort of say, well, maybe you want At Home in the World. But no, they wanted this. And I kind of got it, that it probably would have been a good thing for me to read this book when I was young.
Well, I'll tell you why. I think so many of us have trouble with this, even if we're in a relationship, even if we're in marriage, even if, we have, as you did, a history of, all the relationships that didn't work. We all have that. Some of us are rare, or some people, and they're able to make a go of it and it goes on for whatever, and it seems to be that they're capable of loving. But I'm interested in finding out why, for some of us, it's so hard to learn to be loving, because it's not about being loved; it's about being loving, which you discover. Yeah. And you had some pretty celebrated relationships, one at a very young age that, with an older guy, Mr. Salinger. Does that scar? Does that do crazy things? I can tell you my story. Maybe one day I will. But do you know what I'm saying? What do we get programmed?
Sure, we put a wall around our heart.
Yeah. Talk to me about that and why meeting Jim changed that. Yeah, I want to talk about that.
Well, I'd like to think that I would have gotten to that place without cancer. And I think perhaps I would have. But for me, it was only when I was looking right square in the eye of losing him that I recognized what I had. I say at one point in the book, if only could learn the lesson of cancer without cancer, wouldn't that be great? And that's partly what I attempted to convey in this book. I think we get addicted to all the stuff around the relationship and not the person at the center of it. I had a lot of pictures about what a romance would look like. And actually, this is a love story. It's not a cancer memoir.
Right. I think it's a good point you make. Yeah. Say that again. Say that again. Let me just say that again.
This is a love story. This is not a cancer memoir. I wrote a love story. And it's a love story set against the backdrop of, a very seemingly unromantic situation. There's nothing romantic about, a person going down to 90 pounds and having to give them injections, 3 times a day and try to find a place on their body with, enough flesh to put the needle in. And yet, there's nothing more romantic than true intimacy. True intimacy. And I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about knowing somebody and allowing yourself to be known by that person so very well. And that's, we paid a big price for it, but that's what we did get.
This is interesting to me. The before, I always like the before the story, that moment before. And you so brilliantly tell that moment before. Some of it's actually funny. You have a wicked sense. You have a wicked sense of humor, girlfriend. I loved it. I really did. But were you ripe to fall in love? I have a theory about that. I think that there are times in our life that we just say, "I think I'm ready. Let me go out and give it another shot. Let me go and see where we are." So I think that we can program ourselves to bring it to us. That kind of sounds like hokey pokey, but I do believe that.
Well, I know. I think you're right. That you ideally, many things can happen when we get older. We can get bitter. We can get jaded. Neither of those things happen to me. Or you can say, what do I have to lose? This is my one life, my one wild and precious life. And Jim and I both did that. We dove in. And I describe in the book, as our first Match.com date, it was 4.5 hours long. And we, if you've ever been on a Match.com date, you don't usually tell somebody on that first date, about having relinquished 2, adopted Ethiopian daughters and having been, handcuffed for possible drunk driving. Those are not the sorts of things you mention, when you're trying to put your best foot forward. But I think, and Jim, did his equivalent of that too. I think we felt correctly, what's the point of putting on an act? If that's what it takes to get the person, then what have you gotten? So I said, here I am. This is me. And he did the same.
Well, I want to first say, good for you. You're a better girl than I with this Match.com. I had a few things.
Are you single?
Yeah, I am. And I'm not going back there. Oh, my God. So you were very fortunate in having found him through that. I have to add,
I was lucky, but you only have to be lucky once. I met a lot of people who were not Jim.
Yes, I know.
And you have to have a sort of sense of humor about that and say, I learned some kind of lesson from every one of them. They probably learned a few lessons from me.
Yeah, so you just got to go for it. I get that. I want to quote something that you wrote early in the book, because I wrote this line down. I just thought this was so powerful. And it was about your having met a guy, and you went to Paris with him, the wrong guy. You hardly knew. Venice, right? What did I say, Paris?
Yes.
Yeah, Venice.
First I went to the Amalfi Coast. Actually, I didn't go to Venice with him. I was supposed to go to Venice with him. I went to the Amalfi Coast.
Right.
And by the time I got to Venice, I had bid him goodbye.
Was this Doug? Because this is the one I want to quote, because I get confused.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
This was Doug. So you write, really, this is hilarious. Do you hear me, Joyce? You write, but this is so profound, and I don't know if you meant it was a throwaway line, or you knew exactly what you write. To truly love another, it is essential that you first love yourself. That's my theory, right? And so you, and you write.
Did I say that?
No,
no,
that's what I say. You wrote, thought the company of a man like Doug would have been an improvement over my own. I just winced when you wrote that.
Yeah.
Winced. So I say to myself, not too long before you met him, you were still on shaky ground about, do I love Joyce Maynard? Do I love myself? And yet something happened. And there you were, and you found it. Do you know what that moment was, or he just what? Talk to me. It's profound.
Speaking of,
finding Jim and being open to Jim after having just written,
it wasn't just a thing that happened in me. It was a response to who he was.
Okay,
he was a singularly good man. He was a rare man. That the term, sometimes people say, well, it describes Jim. And the first thing I say is Eagle Scout. And it was many other things besides that, of course. But he was Eagle Scout in the, in the deepest sense. He was this person filled with integrity and also, a sense of humor, great combination. He was fun. He was funny and he was fun. But I felt he deserved my best self. I think he felt that I deserved his best self. We became our best selves with each other. I became a much kinder, nicer, more patient person with Jim. I hadn't always been those things.
He brought the best out in you, and is that a soulmate?
It's not the phrase I tend to use. And actually, I'm not sure that's who he was. We were very different. We were just a great pair. A soulmate maybe is somebody that's, that sees everything the way you do. And he didn't, but he was interested in how I saw things, and I was interested in it's maybe more interesting in some ways than a soulmate. I don't know. I'm sure a soulmate is great, but I don't know that I've ever had a soulmate. He was, lover and friend.
See, I use the term soulmate, and I'm going to put quotes around it. And the only reason I say it is because I think that was, in reading the story, what was so powerful to me was that you did bring out the best of each other, that you wanted to please each other, that you wanted to help each other, that you wanted to love each other. And therein is something extraordinarily special. And most people don't even ever get there. I believe that. Yeah. Okay. And so there's some connection that you get past all the crap, and this person really is amazing, and I just want to love them, and they of you. That's to me a soul. That's a soul mating to me.
Yeah, but I'll add something else. It wasn't that he was this perfect man. I don't believe in the existence of that, and I don't. And I think that's an unrealistic thing to aspire to. The original jacket copy for this book, I think, said something like Joyce and Jim had a blissful marriage, and I made them take it out. What is a blissful marriage? I don't believe in a blissful marriage. We had a real marriage, and the great thing, and that's a much more realistic thing to aspire to. Not this sort of. I have known a handful of people, who meet somebody sort of across a crowded room, and they just, there's some kind of chemical thing that happens. That's very rare, and that wasn't our story. Our story was we recognized that this was a person worth doing the work for.
Yeah.
And that work would be required. And, the book is full of examples of that. And we recognized how precious it was to have a true partner. But it wasn't this sort of, magic, this, inexplicable thing. It was, and that's why I actually think it's a very hopeful book because you can't set out to find this magic person, but you can set out to be a person willing to do the hard work of getting to know and be known by a good but imperfect partner. I have loved it on this book tour when couples came up to me and said, and many have, that they're reading this book out loud to each other. And I think, oh, boy, do I wish that I had my partner to read a book out loud with. You know, what a great thing to share a book and talk about a book and work on something with. I loved it that I had somebody to do the work with. And work was required.
Right, of course. And you marry, and life is pretty darn good. It doesn't get a whole lot better. And then fate intervenes, and I do want to go there a little bit, and Jim's diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So here's what I say to you. I say, sheesh, right? I would have been so pissed at God. How
and where would that get you?
Because I would have been so angry. That's just me. I always emote through anger. But, oh my gosh. I mean, how did you deal with it? The first
well, you're younger than me. It's just.
I'm not.
There wasn't time for anger. I had to get to work. I just had to get to work. I really did believe that we could save him.
Okay.
That I could save him, and so I got very focused on that. But there's no guarantee with this life. I mean, I think this is a uniquely American, middle class American. This may be changing in our country, but right now, you know, in our country, people do somehow believe it's their birthright, you know, to have everything, you know, like go well, and it often doesn't. And that's not to say that I won't get into politics here, but
oh, you can.
It's not to say everybody, you know, every man for himself. No, I'm appalled by what's going on.
You and me both, kiddo.
but it's tragedy. Loss is a part of life, and that's the other message of this book. That, you know, I talk about something that will happen to us all. Not for most, I hope, as brutally as it did for us, but we're all going to die here. And if we live a life of any duration, we're going to lose somebody very precious to us before we do. And very few people really look at that. I've seen it happen at readings of mine. Sometimes the person will get up and walk out. And, you know, it's just too hard for them to think about that. And I think it's a really valuable healing thing to think about it and to, you know, to consider it. You know, how one of the things that this book made me consider is how do I want to die? Because I will die. I'm glad that my husband got to die at home. I'm so glad that my husband got to die very well loved.
There's this too. I want to take you on. I shared with you that at the time you were going through this, I was helping my mother pass. And,
yes.
and when someone close to us who we love is diagnosed with a terminal illness, immediately we think of them. Yeah. And I did exactly. You know, you get rigid. You steel yourself up, and you go and do anything you can to try and save them. It's just human nature. But as I also learned through my own experience, and I wonder if you share this thought, and that is, the truth is, in the end, dying is really, in many ways, for the living.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's something that you thought about, because at the end of the day, we lose them, the profundity of what we've been through. It was as much mine, at least, as what I watched.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Oh, absolutely. And the idea of going through what we went through and taking nothing from it, not taking those lessons, being changed and I hope bettered by it, would be such a waste. It's always my impulse, the direction that I go to try to make something of meaning out of my life experience. That's why I write memoir. When I write memoir, I don't just write memoir, but when I do, it's taking the raw material of my life and trying to, you know, the actual event might have been pretty crappy, but, you know, maybe the story will hold beauty. And that's what I wanted here. I wanted to locate beauty in the most painful and heartbreaking experience of my life.
So talk to me about this.
And I did. It wasn't hard
right.
to find
reading. Yeah. But after such a profound, aha moment of coming to who you were, loving him through this and finding that was what it was really all about, loving the other person, giving to them. After the completion of yet another brutally honest book, a hard chapter in your life, what's life like now for you?
It's good. It's good. I was sort of dreading this moment because from the night Jim died, and I began writing this book the night Jim died, my whole focus has been telling this story and then going all around the country sharing this story. And when I touched down in Miami, that's the end. That is actually the end of it. And then I go home, and I have to carry on with my life. I cannot make my whole life be about the story of my beloved lost husband. I have to make new stories. I have to live new stories. So I worried that might be really painful. But actually, I think if you do it very thoroughly, and I probably didn't do that thoroughly enough when I lost my mother, because I had young children. I didn't sort of honor that moment in my life, that period in my life of just sort of stopping everything and taking in what that meant. But this one I did. For 16 months, my whole life has basically been built around writing this story the absolute best I could, and sharing this story with as many people as I can. And I feel very good about how I did that. I'll tell you, I'm only sorry that when I go to Miami, I don't get to stand up and read this. I really like to, just share as much of this as I possibly can. But I will go home and I'll write something new. I'll start a new novel. I have no idea what it'll be, but I'm excited about that. And I don't know what my life will look like. And I, so often we think we know and we're wrong. So I'm okay with not knowing. And it's my job to build it, not to sort of let it happen to me, but to build it. I'm writing a screenplay for my last novel, and I'll start a new novel, and I'll teach some more, and see my granddaughter, and I hope I love again.
Well, that was what I was going to say to you. When I was finishing the book, the Dionne Warwick song, I know I'll never love again this way again. So I keep on.
Never say that.
Well, here's what she said. She said, I know, I forget the guy who wrote it, and I went back to look at the lyric. I know I'll never love this way again, so I keep holding on before the good is gone. I know I'll never love this way again. Hold on.
Yeah.
Do you think
I
you'll
used
ever?
to believe in the lyrics of too many songs. My whole idea of romance was formed by songs. No, I'm not. She's a great singer, but I'm not buying it. No, I don't think we know. The bar is very high, and it should be for all of us. It should be very high.
But I guess what I have to say, after a circumstance like this, are you at least open to loving again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Good.
I probably more so than I ever was, because I know now that I can do it well, and that I like it. I didn't know that I would like it, actually. I didn't have a big desire to get married. When Jim was the one who wanted to get married, I didn't know that was something that mattered to me.
I've been speaking with author Joyce Maynard. Her new insightful memoir is The Best of Us. For more information on Joyce, her books, her life, her writing classes, visit JoyceMaynard.com. You are listening to Talkish, and I am Halli Casser-Jayne. My guests today are author Joyce Maynard, her latest book, The Best of Us, and author Martha Hall Kelly, her book, Lilac Girls. Tune in to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne. Nearly 300 episodes available at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Based on the true story of a New York socialite who championed a group of concentration camp survivors known as the Rabbits, Martha Hall Kelly's acclaimed debut novel, Lilac Girls, is a story of love, redemption, and terrible secrets that were hidden for decades. The book hit the New York Times bestseller list, and for good reason. Martha Hall Kelly is a great weaver of tale. The plot. Carolyn Faraday is a former Broadway actress and liaison to the French consulate, whose life is forever changed when Hitler's army invades Poland in September 1939, and then sets its sights on France. An ocean away from Caroline, Kasia Kuzmarek, a Polish teenager, sinks deeper into her role as a courier for the underground resistance movement. In Germany, Herta Oberhuser, a young doctor, answers an ad for a government medical position, only to find herself embroiled in the male-dominated realm of Nazi secrets and power. The lives of these three women are set on a collision course when the unthinkable happens, and Kasia is sent to Ravensbrück, the notorious and only Nazi concentration camp for women. Riveting, painful, hope-filled, Lilac Girls is a must-read best-selling book for good reason. It's time for Talkish. Let's talk. Martha, who said there are no accidents? There are no coincidences. You stumbled on the story of Carolyn Faraday, which led you to the writing of Lilac Girls. So first, tell us about what I think it would be fair to say became your obsession, Carolyn and the rabbits. And let's start with Carolyn. Tell us a little bit about who she was and what she did and how you found her.
It was crazy. I just stumbled on the story. I had carried a clipping around in my wallet from the old Victoria magazine, which I loved so much. And the headline of it was Caroline's Incredible Lilacs. And it talked about this home up in Bethlehem, Connecticut, that this woman who had passed away had left to Connecticut Landmarks. And she had collected specimen lilacs from around the world, with her mother did as well. And so I had always wanted to go up there to see it. And one gray Mother's Day after my mother passed away, my husband said, why don't you just go up there and see that house, which I did. And the gardens were so beautiful. It was a perfect lilac time. And the garden tour was incredible. I was the only one on the tour that day. And then after that, I toured the house and got to ask every question. It was just kind of perfect timing. And at the end of the tour guide said, she told the story of how Carolyn Faraday, who was a socialite, brought these Polish Catholic women to the United States for rehabilitation after they had been imprisoned at Ravensbrück concentration camp, the only all-female camp in the Third Reich. And they had been experimented on their legs, and that's why the nickname, the Rabbits, stuck. The Nazis nicknamed them the Rabbits. And so Caroline brought them to the U.S. in the late 50s for rehabilitation. And once I heard that story, I just couldn't get it out of my head.
This woman, I had never heard of her, and I grew up in that area, so I'm surprised. I'm absolutely fascinated by this woman, and the way that you create her in the book, it fascinates me as well. Before we even get into the meat of it, I am curious about this, because it's such an unbelievably gut-wrenching story that you stumbled onto. Why'd you write it as fiction and not nonfiction?
I didn't even think of writing it as nonfiction. I just figured it had to be a novel. I didn't even consider otherwise.
Really? And at this point, somebody needs to. Yeah.
There isn't that much information about Caroline. She was actually, even though she has 3 archives, she was researching other people, which is so interesting. She was actually researching Herta Oberhauser, who was the only female doctor at the all-female camp, who I write about in Lilac Girls. She's one of the 3 main point-of-view characters. So that's how I found out about Herta, who participated in the experiments, a German doctor. But yeah, I found out about her through Caroline.
But there's not that much information out there, which is fascinating in and of itself, because what she did, oh my gosh. Listen, let's talk about these characters, because each offers a very different perspective on life in World War II. And that was one of the brilliance of this book. And as I told you off air, I will say it online. I rarely get to finish a book at the time I do the interview, because I am pitched so many books and I do so many interviews. I stayed up all night reading this book, and you and I were scheduled to do an interview, last week it was. And that morning I fell jogging and I killed my ankle because I stayed up all night reading the book. I was so exhausted. This is just, it's wonderful, and I needed to say that. But let's get back to these characters. So there is a socialite, Carolyn Faraday, and there's the Polish member of the resistance, Kasia Kuzmarek. By the way, based on a real Ravensbrück survivor with whom you spoke, Nina, is it Iwanska or Iwanska? How does she pronounce it?
Nina Iwanska. I never spoke to her. She passed away before
you didn't.
I found out about her. But she was incredible. She was the one that wrote so-called urine letters, these secret letters that they smuggled out of the camp.
Tell us about that, because that's fascinating. Let's sidebar. Yeah.
I was fascinated with that. She also had a sister who was a doctor, which is her sister Susanna in the novel. But yes, she and some of her friends at the camp wrote in their own urine letters, secret letters, in between the lines of what looked like just a normal letter. So they just posted these letters out of the camp telling their families about the experiments, and they had every name of every girl. And there were over 70 women that were operated on. And, those Polish names are long. I just can't believe with just a tiny toothpick in their own urine that they wrote these incredible letters. And when I went to Warsaw and to Lublin, which is where these women are from, I got to see one of the letters in a museum there, and it just blew me away. It's so moving to see them. I think they had over 20 of them that they wrote.
And she sent the letters out to her dad in the book. Yeah. And the dad was able to figure out that there was the subterfuge in these letters. I mean, think about the intellect in the midst of this nightmare that these women were able to come up with. And even the subterfuge, getting back at the guards in the middle of this camp. I mean, we're going to talk about this in a second, but I want to go back to these characters. So there is Caroline. There's this Polish member of the resistance, Kasia Kuzmarek, and there's the doctor who I would rather call a butcher, and Herta Oberhauser, the German. All of their lives are intertwined into this. It's so well set up that as a writer that you did there. Different people, different personalities, different motivations, different worlds. Here's my question. I wonder what you found similar about them, because we all understood the differences.
Wow. That's such a great... No one has ever asked me that before. I think that they all wanted to be loved and to love other people. And I even Herta, I really tried to show her as a real person. My first attempts were, because this is my first novel, but my first attempts with Herta were, I just made her such a cliche, mean Nazi. I gave her a gay little brother, and she was mean to him. And although I still miss that character, I took him out. But, I just made her kind of so stereotypically bad. But I went back and made her more real and made her want to love someone else. And that ends up being, of course, Kasia's mother, who's also imprisoned at the camp. But Caroline, I think, wanted to be loved, and also Kasia. I think they all, that's a real universal thing, I think, that even when you're in a concentration camp, you still want to look your best. And that really surprised me, that the women still cared about their appearance, and they just wanted to be normal and to love again.
This going back and doing this historical drama on Nazi Germany is kind of a thing these days. I always worry about it because a lot of what I read, although engaging, romanticizes it. And it should never, ever be romanticized. And how dangerous is that? Which I'm sure you understood, which is why you didn't do that. If there's romance at all, it's going to come in the character you introduced for Faraday. We'll talk about him in a minute. But the point is this. There were themes here that you were exploring. I mean, Faraday, to me, is the good in people. Kasia is how you say her name, the courage in people. Herta, the cowardice in people. What did you come to understand about human nature in the writing of Lilac Girls? Because I have to believe that you went in one way and found something different, altering at the end. Maybe not. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't really go into it looking for themes, but they just kind of came out. I think one of them is forgiveness. And that was something I struggled with, just because how do you forgive someone like Herta for doing that? Kasha was 16 when she was operated on, and Herta and the rest of the camp doctors just stole her childhood. So also, Caroline goes through some things that she has to forgive people for, namely Paul. But it came home in a real-life way when I went to Ravensbrück, and I interviewed 2 of the surviving rabbits. There were 5 alive at the time, and I went to the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the camp, and it was just incredible meeting them. One named Stasha, who just passed away, sadly. We became friends. I don't want to say friends, but a little bit. We came to know each other, and as well as you can know someone that doesn't speak your language. She's very lovely woman, and another one of the rabbits named Wanda, and it was incredible talking to them, as you can imagine. One of them, Stasha, had come to the United States and knew Caroline, and I asked her, what was that like? And she said, that's the one thing I can't talk about because it's so, so sad. And it was the hardest thing I ever did, to come back to Poland after being in the United States. Everyone was so lovely to us. They literally saved our lives. And I just thought, she had been through such horror. And to say that was the hardest thing, leaving the United States, that she ever had to do. But I asked her, what is it like to come back to Ravensbrück after, they had been so horrible to you and experimented on you? I had a hard time going there, just knowing what they had done. And she said, it was hard at first, but now we had to forgive. We had to let it all go because it was killing us. She said they didn't kill us, but they were going to if we continued to hold on to the hate. So she had to give it up. I actually came home and rewrote the ending of the book once I talked to her because I realized they didn't hold on to the hate. And I was surprised by that. And it was a really good life lesson just for me in my own life, that you really can't hold on to grudges.
Oh, it's funny. I have that line that you have in the book, quote, "Don't waste your energy on the hate. That will kill you sure as anything."
Oh, Matka. Yeah, that's Kasha's mother told her that.
Oh, my God. When I read that, I just went crazy. Now, I've just done, I do a lot of interviews with survivors. And I had just done one with somebody not too long ago. And I had met her in person here in Florida. She took me by the shoulders when I was asking about it. And she says, no. You can never hate, and you must forgive. You must forgive. And I'm like, huh? How? Where? I've never met a Holocaust survivor who doesn't practice forgiveness. And oddly enough, in the Jewish religion, by the way, it doesn't require that you forgive.
Really?
Yes. You go look that one up in the Bible. Interesting. Mm-hmm. But there it is. So that I actually had that because talk to me about hate. I've interviewed these survivors. Hate isn't there, but forgiveness is. If you meet somebody like that, Martha, you change, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And just hanging around Caroline so much, she's passed away. I've been in her archives, and she just always did the right thing. And you just kind of start doing that yourself. It's very strange. It rubs off on you.
It does. I want to talk to you about this. So interesting to me. I read this stuff, and a lot of the writers who get to the camp part of their story, they reference it. They don't go there. Mm-hmm. I think the master of going there, by the way, was Herman Wouk. I don't know if you ever read The Wings of War and War and Remembrance, but
love them.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm like possessed with that. I watch that all the time. I still watch the series over and over. It just is compelling. He did go there. He went to the gas chamber in War in the sequel, and War and Remembrance at the end. But you do go there.
Oh,
and you give us this gripping, disturbing account of the experiments the bad Dr. Huerta performs on the rabbits. And it's harrowing. There's no question. Why did you decide to go there when others haven't? And what the hell was it like writing those scenes?
Wow. I felt like there... I didn't consider not going there just because I was fascinated with Ravensbrück and I did so much research. And I felt like it was a really important part of the story, because if you don't experience that along with the rabbits, along with Kasha and with Herta from her point of view, you can't experience the joy of being released from that afterwards. And I knew my story, I knew the end of it, that those two would have to confront each other because that was the true story. So I had to go there. And quite frankly, I was just so fascinated with it. And I felt responsible to these women that I had to show what happened there, because that's the whole story, really, that they were experimented on and why. And I was very careful, though, not to make it gratuitous. I tried not to, show things that, just for the sake of showing how terrible it was. And I think I succeeded in that. People tell me that they feel like they understood what happened, but they didn't feel like it was overly graphic for no reason.
I felt it was very fair, and in fact, I think it was the first time I really read anything with the description from the point of view of the victims, which made it all the more gripping and eye-opening for me. I want to take another sidebar, really quickly, and it is about the fact that Carolyn has this affair, which is not true to her real life, with a married man, a gorgeous French, darling, handsome actor we all wish we'd find. Sometime. Well, some of us. And why did you pursue that plot line? I'm curious.
Well, I avoided in my first drafts giving Caroline a love interest because I didn't know anything about her personal life, that part of it. And I really wanted to stay true to her as a person. But then I interviewed a close friend of hers who told me about a relationship that she had. And I thought, okay, I feel like I have enough information to at least base a relationship on. And that's what I did. He was British. I made him French and incredibly attractive. But I also did it because Caroline never married and never had children. And I think that it was difficult for her because she was from a long line of incredibly philanthropic Wolseley women, this old Mayflower family, that she was the last of the line. And I think she had a lot of guilt about not carrying on, that family line. And in order to explore that, I had to give her some sort of a relationship. Otherwise, she would just be pining, sitting around being sad that she had never had children. So that's why I gave her that relationship.
I love the fact that she did have children.
Yes.
The rabbits were the children.
Oh, I'm so glad you say that, because that really is how she felt about them, and them about her too. They would always sign their letters. They would call her their godmother, but she thought of them as her children for sure. She left them in her last will and testament all her most beautiful jewelry and her things, and I think she really did feel like they were hers.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you about survival. It's built into the human spirit, and what we do to survive might, therefore, not be a choice, rather a condition of humanity. So I asked you in the writing about the Nazis in particular, addressing the question, how could they do such unspeakable things to their fellow human beings? It seems to me that before you even wrote Heir to Story, you must have had some thought on the subject, survival versus free will. And now, having written the book, where do you come down on this subject? And did you insert your views in the book? Or I have a feeling your answer would be the characters asserted them to you. But I think this is an important conversation which is rarely had.
What do you mean survival versus...
Well, because I think terrible things happen to us, or we are terrible people. Herta walks into the circumstance and she has a choice. She can say, no, I'm not going to do these experiments. She doesn't. She does them. Is she compelled by survival?
I see. That was a really interesting part of my research. I think she was partially compelled by survival. When the doctors went to camps such as Ravensbrück and Auschwitz, they were given a pretty tight timeline. In 2 weeks, they had to say either you're staying or you're not. And then if you didn't, you were pretty much ostracized. She needed the money. I know that. Her family was very poor. The fact that she even became a doctor as a woman was a miracle. And I know that she was very proud. She got a lot of satisfaction from her work. And it was a tough time. Hitler wanted women to be at home having children, not working. So she had to take what she could get. So I think once she got to the camp, she saw an ad in a medical journal and applied. I don't think she really fully understood what was going on until she got there. And there was a lot of, I know she felt like it was hard being the only woman. There were over 100 doctors at Ravensbrück at different times. So there was a lot of pressure on her, I think, to perform. And when you look at it from her point of view, she was indoctrinated so heavily into National Socialism. To her, she thought she was doing the right thing to support Hitler, and especially when they were winning the war, they felt like they could do whatever they wanted to. And her rationale after, at the doctor's trial and her testimony, was that these women were sentenced to death. They didn't know that at the time, but they did have a death sentence. And she said she figured, well, they were going to die anyway. Why not operate on them? She really believed that. So it was fascinating digging into her.
I don't think there are any excuses for what she did. And I think I just spent 3 months, by the way, in Germany this summer. Yeah. It was very, very interesting. I had a lot of odd things happen. One was a friend was showing me her book of photos, for family photos. Didn't even realize that in the pictures were all her Nazi aunts and uncles. I'm Jewish, by the way. You can imagine.
Oh my God.
Right. And I had to say, they're all SS officers. Look at this. And she said, my God. I said, how do you deal with this? And the answer was the shame. And you can see it in older Germans, by the way. If you will, yes, you will not convince me that the people who were alive at the time of the war, who's still there, look 900 years older than any American of the same age. Just look worn out from it all. I don't think it's quite over for them. I don't think it would ever be over for them. That's interjecting my perspective on it. But I want to say to you this, which is, I bring up that point of free will versus instinct to survive. I find all of it inexcusable. There's good, there's bad, and I think at some point there's a black and white answer to that. As a novelist, I'm sure you have to take literary challenges from a different point of view, but that's where I am on it. But I also want to talk to you about mental illness. This was fascinating. I thought you're bringing this character of Vilma Hartman in there to assess her. Brings this to its brilliance, which makes it this a little bit different. Did you think she was mentally ill?
Wow, no one ever brought up Vilma before. He's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, I think it's so important to the story.
Yeah, and he actually is kind of a sympathetic German in a way, because he's kind of trying to help people. But I think she was, you mean the actual Hertha or my character? Your character. Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that the war and the camp and just people and maiming them for life, I think that takes a toll. And I think it did. And she was very sick during the trial. I know that. She had a lot of lung issues. And I think a big part of that, too, was that she was just physically messed up from being so terrible to other people.
What about the real life? Because I don't know that there is that much difference there, because I have to believe that anybody who could do that crossed a line into illness, mental illness.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said before, when they were winning, everything was, for the Nazis, wonderful. They could do whatever they want. They could experiment on whoever they felt like experimenting on. But then when they started losing and the shoe was on the other foot, that's when you could see in all the doctors, not just Hertha, but they started into this kind of downward spiral. And in real life, yeah. I mean, she ended up being a broken woman, did not marry, died relatively young in her 60s. And, once they took her medical license away, that was what she lived for. And I think that it just crushed her.
Well, her story as to what happened, because she only got she did go to trial, and she only got how much originally, and they reduced the sentence down to nothing. They let her out.
The Americans did. Well,
I know, which is really even...
it's just so frustrating. She got a 20-year sentence, and she ended up only serving 5. And the Americans let her out because they were trying to curry favor with the Germans for the space program versus, Russia was competing with us for all of the German scientists. So they made a deal, and also included in that deal was Fritz, from the book, Fritz Fischer, friend, more than friend. But he was let out too. He had a life sentence, and he was the only one at the trial, interestingly, that showed any remorse. And he had lost his arm at the front, and he was a surgeon. And so I think that all kind of came together. And the jury didn't sentence him to death like they did Dr. Gephardt. They let him live, and then he was set free in 5 years.
But she does get her license back, only to have it then taken away. That was what Faraday did.
Yes. When Caroline found out, from her French friends that Herta was out and it was practicing medicine again on children. She was a family doctor. Caroline just said, no, this is not going to happen. And they really fought back because Herta was up in Stocksee, which is north of Berlin, and it was a real Nazi hotbed. And they had all sorts of friends and powerful people, and Himmler's daughter lived there and was contributing money to everyone's pensions. And she did well until Caroline got her doctor friends from England involved, and they pretty quickly had her license taken away.
Unbelievable. I'm not going to tell the end of the book. We'll leave that for everybody to have to find out because it's a fascinating ending, needless to say. I want to speak very briefly to this because I was so astonished when I read that you wrote this at the end of the book, that things that you did while during the writing of it, that you actually put yourself into a dog's pen to write. No, I get that. I totally get that. That had all the wire around it, that you ate profusely because you think that it had something to do with your feeling for the way these women were starved and lived starving for 4 years of their lives. I just had to give you a moment for people to understand what a writer can sometimes put themselves through.
I had to stop sitting in the dog kennel because we were new to Atlanta at the time, and our neighbors were driving by and looking at me in there, and I thought, probably better not to be the Yankee in the dog kennel. So I had to stop doing that. But yeah, I did start eating like crazy. And then I thought, maybe that's just what writers do because they're sitting all day. And then I realized that I was reading about these women that were starving. And that's how the Nazis killed them at the camp. They worked them to death and fed them nothing. And so I was kind of sympathetically eating. And my friend Stacy Fitzgerald, who is doing a documentary on the rabbits and Caroline, she told me the same thing. She said, I'm eating so much, I don't know why. And I said, it's because, the pathetic thing.
I so get that. So listen to me. So you birthed this book. You survived. You survived the writing of it, right?
Yes. It was nothing compared to what they did, of course. But
it's a lot. And I want to ask you this because we know their story. What about you? What lessons learned for Martha?
I think the biggest one, well, first of all, just being a writer now is just every day I get up and I just pinch myself. I can't believe it. But I think the biggest thing was from Caroline, other than the whole forgiveness thing that I learned from Stasha. But I think it was you really have to look for things, because she did, for things to do for other people. Because I'm just a shy person, and I used to be too embarrassed to kind of put myself out there if I saw something that was happening. And now I'm fearless that way. Maybe I'm just getting older, but I think I've taken a page out of Caroline's book, and a few times I've just said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to do what I think is right. And I step in, and I'm always so happy that I do. I feel like I'm channeling Caroline, but that's what she used to do. She just was one of those women that if it was the right thing to do, she just did it. So I think nowadays that it's something we all need to. I get a lot of emails from people now after they read the book, and they say they've been inspired by Caroline in that way, and they're doing more things like that. And that always makes me really happy.
I've been speaking with Martha Hall Kelly, her debut novel, the New York Times bestselling Lilac Girls. To find out why her book is titled Lilac Girls, and for more information on the author and her work, visit marthahallkelly.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec, LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern. Visit hallicasserjayne.com.